In May of 2011, historian Richard Norton Smith led a 10-day bus tour from Asheville, North Carolina to Austin, Texas. The group stopped at several presidential and historic sites along the route. One of the stops was the Andrew Johnson Homestead in Greenville, Tennessee, a site owned and operated by the National Park Service. Johnson served as vice president under President Lincoln and succeeded him when Lincoln was assassinated. Here's park guide Daniel Luther portraying President Johnson and telling the story of how Andrew Johnson met Abraham Lincoln.
In 1847, I went into the 30th Congress for my third term representing the people of the 1st District, and while I was there I met an extremely tall, raw-boned young man representing the prairie state of Illinois, and his name was Abraham Lincoln. And we fell into conversation, and I introduced myself and told him that I was from Northeast Tennessee, and he replied that he had relatives in Northeast Tennessee, and perhaps I knew some of them. He identified his great-uncle Isaac as having owned a farm up on the Watauga, at which his father, Thomas Lincoln, had worked as something of a hired hand in the 1790s, and he also identified another great-uncle, a gentleman by the name of Mordecai, who lived in the town of Greeneville. To which I replied, "Greenville is my hometown. And your great-uncle Mordecai, in fact, performed the wedding ceremony for me and my wife Eliza in 1827, as well as Mordecai and I served on the town council together in 1829, and I reassured Mr. Lincoln that he was in good hands in terms of politics, that his great-uncle had gained a great many more votes than I had." But like many young men who came into Congress at the time, we went in there with goals. And each of us had a cherished goal that we wanted to achieve in that Congress. Mine was the introduction of a Homestead bill. For Mr. Lincoln, it was the introduction of legislation which would have provided for compensated emancipation of slaves in the District of Columbia. And like other young men who go into Congress, we found out it is not so easy to get your cherished goals accomplished. And so we left that session of Congress without those bills passed. I would serve 2 more terms. Mr. Lincoln, that would be his only term in the House of Representatives. At the beginning of the 4th term, I bought the house that you have just seen. But it is irony. Those of us who lived through our late unhappy struggle often felt that we were caught up in the hands of fate. And as fate would have it, each of us, Abraham Lincoln and myself, were 15 years in the future able to help the other achieve that earlier cherished goal. For my part, Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Bill into law in 1862. In 1864, I helped Mr. Lincoln gain at least one state into the column of abolition, emancipation, and that is the state of Tennessee that you're visiting today. You heard some of these words earlier, so I'm going to give you just a short excerpt. In October of 1864, word got out that I, as military governor, was about to issue a proclamation of emancipation for the slaves in Tennessee. And this created a large gathering at the state capitol, and I stepped out to address them and used some of the following words. Colored people of Nashville, you have all heard of the President's proclamation by which he proclaims that a large portion of the slaves in the state still in rebellion have been declared henceforth and forever free. For reasons which seemed wise to the President, this proclamation did not apply to you or to your native state. Consequently, many of you were left in bondage. The fetters still galled your limbs. Gradually, this iniquity has been passing away, but the time has come for the last vestiges of it to be removed. Therefore, I, without reference to the President or any other person, have a proclamation to make, and standing here on the steps of the Capitol, with the past history of the state to witness, its present condition to guide, its future to encourage me, I, Andrew Johnson, do hereby proclaim freedom, full, broad, and unconditional to every man in Tennessee. Those were words. Some 4 months later, we backed them up with action. The convention I called to recreate a loyal state government to the Union also enacted an amendment to the Tennessee State Constitution, ending forever slavery in this state, which became part of our Constitution with a popular vote of the people on February 22, 1865. Shortly after that, I went back to Washington to take the seat as Vice President, the second highest office in the gift of a free people. 5 weeks later, the war was over, and one of its final casualties, our martyred president. And with his death, the burden he had borne for 4 years fell upon my shoulders. Sorrowful times, discouraging times, and yet as I spoke to the gathering of the cabinet that came to my rooms at the Kirkwood Hotel the morning of April 15th, I told them that I had hope. I had hope that our government, having emerged from its present trials, would settle on policies more consonant with the great principles of free government than it had had heretofore. And I believed this nation would come together and would move forward. And I had good, strong reason for my hope. I had faith in the Union. I had faith, abiding faith, in the Constitution. And above all else, I had faith in the people. Thank you for your kind attention.
One quick question.
Sir.
There's a bit of a controversy among us 150 years later over you and the part you played in the decision in the trial of the Lincoln conspirators.
Yes, sir.
And in particular, the decision, the unprecedented decision on the part of the federal government to execute a woman, Mary Surratt. Could you tell us how that came about?
Yes, sir. I will tell you, and I'm aware of the controversy, and I'm aware there are a number of different sides to it, that in my view, Mrs. Surratt was guilty. I believed she was the person who kept the nest that hatched the egg. However, the controversy arises over this. Having been convicted by military tribunal and having been sentenced to death by that same tribunal, 5 of the 9 judges on the tribunal recommended clemency for Mrs. Surratt. In other words, that her death sentence be commuted to life in prison. I was unaware of that commutation recommendation. I was freshly into my office. I was allowing myself to be guided by the cabinet and the other officers who'd been present. And when Judge Advocate Joseph Holt brought me the papers, including the death warrants, I signed them. Some 2 years later, 1867, now it is interesting, this is when the impeachment crisis was emerging. The newspapers began printing the awareness that a recommendation of clemency had been made and that I had ignored it. And I sent to the War Department requesting to see those documents. And when I did see them, it appeared to me that the clemency recommendation, which was right there, had been torn out and reattached. And I thought only 2 men could have done such a thing. One of them, Joseph Holt, Judge Advocate General, who had been responsible for the trial, but the other was his superior, Edwin Stanton. So perhaps I will leave it this way. The next day, after I saw those documents from the War Department, I sent a short note to Secretary Stanton which read, "Dear Sir, public considerations of a high character constrain me to inform you that your resignation as Secretary of War will be accepted." May I tell you what he said in response? "Dear Sir, public considerations of a high character constrain me to inform you that I will not resign the office until Congress comes back into session," knowing at the time he believed that he was already protected by the tenure of office law.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Indeed. All right.
For more information about the Andrew Johnson National Historic Site, visit their website at nps.gov/ANJO. And to learn more about tours with historian and author Richard Norton Smith, go to presidentsandpatriots.com. American History TV, all weekend, every weekend, on C-SPAN 3.